Welcome to Crossing Faiths, where a Christian and Muslim talk religion and politics. Although we've ousted the Christian on this episode, Matthew Hawkins is on hiatus, and I have my good friend and colleague here, Manal Omar from Across Red Lines, and we're here to talk about our post-election eval. So we're going to get down and dirty on that, although we did have a conversation about what is the best cut for a sandwich prior to our recording. And I think the consensus was a triangular cut sandwich is inexplicably more delicious than a square cut sandwich. Are you on point with that, Manal, or?
Absolutely. I mean, it's much easier to hold, so I like that.
I think the corners are much more delicious as the smaller they are, the smallest part of the sandwich, the morsel,
I
right?
think we're going to have to come back and visit crust or no crust in this analysis. So
Oh, it came very close to saying Christ or no Christ. So on this podcast, that can be very dicey. So we're just
nowhere
talking
near
about
that.
crusts. We're not talking
Nowhere
about
near
Christ.
that.
It's not a metaphor for anything. That's my disclaimer statement. All right. So just talking about
I
sandwiches.
didn't go there.
Well, the problem is like we said, we do talk about religion and politics. So there's a couple of our fans that are out there that will say, what does the sandwich represent? And it just represents
God.
a sandwich.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I'm very familiar within our own tradition of the literalists. So
yeah,
good warning. Good
So
warning.
we wanted to do a little post-election business. I know this. Matthew and I spent some time at the election, going back and forth, and I know that Matthew's been out and about, and I was heavily embedded dealing with both campaigns. But we have a really amazing moment in time where we have a president-elect. Joe Biden, former Vice President Biden, and then we also have the first woman presidential elect, president elect. And then we also have a third. We have a president, so who hasn't conceded yet. So we have this interesting moment in time, and so we felt that it would be really interesting for us to kind of do a post on the election and really get some opinions back and forth. And Manal is uniquely positioned to give us her take on post-election. So maybe I'll just give you a general question. Where were you during the election? How did it go for you? Were you rooting for one side? Do you want to root for one side and say you're for a camp, or and really what were you feeling during this time?
So I mean, I was actually on election day in Philly, so I love that claim to be able to say that I was in Philly, and that's kind
Okay.
of where it really went down. And I am a proud Democrat, but I have to say this was one of the first elections where I found it really hard to vote. I wasn't expecting a landslide win. I wasn't expecting, the way it was being framed in terms of just getting Trump out. I wanted to see a lot more healing, a lot more reconciliation in the last 4 years, and I was very disappointed that I didn't see it. And my worst fears were kind of revealed in this election, which was so tight. Yet again, polling is completely off, which just isn't just about the statistics, it's about the level of safety the citizen feels in sharing their accurate vote. And I think those are stronger indicators of where we are as a country than who won or who lost. Like, I really feel this election, to a certain extent, we're all losers because of the tension that's surrounding it, because of the polarization that we're in as a country and the divide. Clearly, I'm happy to see history made with Kamala and the vice president. But we've been here before, and we paid a really heavy price for the first Black president. So I think that we need to just be aware of what the cost and what the price is for this new breakthrough as a country.
No, I appreciate that insight. I across the river is a place called Rhinebeck, New York, and everybody had Biden and Harris signs. And one of my buddies had one on his lawn, and I said to him, I said, "Oh, you're going Biden Harris?" And he goes, "No, I'm not." He goes, "I just don't." He goes, "I want everybody to think I'm a lib, but I'm voting Trump." And
Yeah.
and uh, and I had a friend down the road who owns a garage, and he painted Black Lives Matter on his garage, really explicit across the top. And I go, "God," I go, you're all in on this." He goes, "I don't want to get vandalized." I goes,
Yeah.
I don't really know, and I don't really care about Black Lives Matter," is what he said. And so there's a lot of sort of feigning in back and forth on what's going on in fencing. I used to fence, where you fake a move and people are saying that they are something or going to do something. I've worked with a polling organization, one of the top polling organizations, and the president and executive director of it said, "Look, polls are nonsense." He goes, "Whoever pays for the poll gets the information they want. We submit the questions, and then once we get the data, we can do anything with the data." So, but I also think that there's so much information flowing back and forth that, people fear change, right? But things
Mhm.
are changing so fast because of the internet and the information that's flowing. And even if you have a trend right now, it moves so far down the road. And by the time you say you're for that trend, you might have recommitted to something sexier.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and right, because we're not talking about any dramatic or surprising change, right? I
No.
mean, when we're talking about Black Lives Matter, you can't get more of a common, denominator among, that these lives matter, and yet it's still controversial. And this
Yeah.
is, centuries in the making. When you're talking about women's rights, I mean, what we're talking about as the big change, I mean, it's molasses for this country. We've been talking about it for centuries, if not decades. And what we're really, I think what made me sad is we continuously miss the structural violence and the institutional structure that is causing all of this. And we almost became obsessed with Trump to a point where it was distraction from the real institutional changes that need to happen. And I think that's where I become worried, is we want quick fixes. And if anything, we want that change on the surface. We don't want to go deep rooted. And of course, I don't think any politician, just because of the nature of short term and policy making, will really invest in that long term change. So I want to see it from the civic engagement, from the community, where we're designing town halls, where we're having dialogues, where the initiative is very much a grassroots organization. And with this polarization, I can't really think of a neutral space to do that. And I think that's what really makes me sad.
It reminds me of the conversation we had on it was not election day, but maybe it was election day, but it was just after that when you and I spoke, and you and two other people said the same comment to me, and it really did mean something, because with any regime, whether it was the Obama regime, the Bush regime, whatever, I'm always there, and the Trump regime is no different.
Mhm.
And it was no different than my participation, because I believe of working within process, right? Uh, and there's always the people that hit the streets, but then there's the so what now, and I'm the so what now usually, and usually I have a
Mhm.
group of people that are in the room. In the Trump administration, it was only me. And I was in many cases the only alternate voice, and I'm speaking for different constituencies, and some of them I really don't even represent, or I'm not even sure I know about. So, but it was a very thoughtful moment, because everyone disengaged with the Trump administration, and I engaged. I had a friend of mine an evangelical friend of mine, and it was like 2 days after the inauguration, and he said, "Well, now," he goes, "what are you going to do now?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "It's our time now. You might as well just leave Washington." And I
Mhm.
go, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "You should just leave." He goes, "This is our time now." And I go, "Well, now I'm not going to leave." And I was
Mhm.
actually thinking about semi-retiring, and I spent this last 4 years doing pro bono work, just engaging the administration, and never took a penny, never took an appointment. And now I'm in this strange position where we have this president-elect, and there's been no one on the inside talking to this administration that really knows the bulwark of what's going on, and it's much harder to work in those environments. And as someone who's worked throughout the Middle East and been heavily involved in government with your time at USIP and so forth, you know what it's like to be in a room with people that you don't agree with at all,
Mhm.
and you might be the only alternate voice, but it's harder to stay in that room and participate. So I really appreciate that comment you made. But maybe you could speak a little bit about your experience and how that is a reflection about what's going on, what happened with the Trump administration, and how that's how that is related to the Biden administration.
Yeah, I mean, well, I definitely think you and others who stayed engaged, it was a really crucial role. I lasted 9 months into the Trump administration, and then I decided to, resign. And in a lot of instances, I wonder how much the decision was really mine, because I was being attacked and, by name on Congress. So it wasn't even like that space was something that I really had a choice in. So I think that's the other angle to always remember, because, I'm always cautious of fair weather citizenship. I don't want to just be an active citizen when it's a president I like, or, representation I like. We
Right.
have to always be engaged in one form or another. But I think the Trump administration was very clever and strategic in targeting people like me to make sure we were as uncomfortable and as threatened as possible, so that we would be pushed out and leave. Especially because I wasn't an appointee. I was very proud to serve under the Obama administration, but I competed for that position. So, those seats become harder. And that there was a group of us on text that were encouraging each other to stay in the seat as long as possible. Like, don't leave, don't leave, don't leave. So congratulations to those who managed to succeed and stay engaged like you. And
No,
I
there was
think,
some tough moments. I got thrown out of the White House 3 times. Yeah, then a bunch of them still call me Jihadi John. Still,
yeah,
a bunch of them still.
horrible.
It's
Yeah, I'll
terrible,
never
right?
forget, there was a moment where like someone actually petted me in one of the meetings, and they're like, "We know you don't want to be here, but you're being a good employee and coming," and then just kind of tapped me on the head. And I'm like, did I just get petted by this new administration? So it was pretty,
I don't
it
mean
was
it to
pretty
laugh, but
outrageous.
like they call me. I was a whole group of people they call me the unicorn,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
don't know I still don't know what that means. It's
yeah.
still, so.
Well,
But
I mean, in itself, it's a very derogatory and discriminatory term, because they imagine that there is such a small number
yeah,
of Muslims that want to be engaged, and so they treat us like we're a unicorn, when the reality is we are the norm in our community. They just have
absolutely.
such a strong stereotype of othering us that, even like, I still get, despite being raised in Spartanburg, South Carolina, like, your English is so good, and it blows my mind every time I get that. And that's true of both administrations. So let's be fair there.
Yeah,
But I,
it is interesting. I mean, because in both administration, but the Obama administration, like I think I always tell a story. I was told, I wasn't ethnic enough, and my name wasn't Muslim enough.
yeah,
That was the
yeah,
Obama administration that said that, and I go, what? Like
yeah,
John, I said, if it helps, you can call me John in Arabic. You can call me Yahya if that'll
yeah,
help you, and but
yeah.
it's
I
strange.
mean,
It's how people look
by
at and perceive us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see a lot of indication of this, but I hope this administration is brave enough to really go to the roots. I think the Democratic Party itself has shown that it's not brave enough to have the true difficult conversations. And that's the party that I am aligned with. So it's the one that I want to address and help change and push a little bit further, because I really think we need to go into real difficult conversations. And one of the things that really worries me is the level that identity has begun to play a role in politics. We've moved past expertise, we've moved past the technical skill, and we're allowing identity to define us so strongly. And I think that happens when you don't have faith in governance. And it's something that, it's an old statistic, I think, from a few years ago, but globally, something close to like 65% of citizens don't have faith in their governments. And that's a real fear. I mean, it's a real fear when you don't, because that's when you go subculture, that's when you go sub identity, that's when the whole social contract is really in question. And I think that's the problem that I have with the US, is we don't realize that our social contract has been broken and we're not ready to renegotiate it. I would love an administration, and considering that the Obama administration forced this on so many other countries, I hope that they look inward and do a national dialogue process. I mean, we've been the lead, and I've been part of the processes doing it overseas. And it's long overdue in this country. Our country, our land, the soul of the country is begging for some type of reconciliation. And I just don't have faith that anyone is really ready to step forward. But I know that's the kind of mantra, that's the, drum I'm going to be beating, is like, let's really host a national dialogue. Let's really begin to have the difficult conversation. And we can't have it in this polarization. So I'd like to have the intra, like the Democrats. We need to bring the Bernie people. I still call them the Hillary people, but you can call them the Biden people. But,
Right.
we need to bring them together. We need to start having those conversations. We need to have, someone like Stacey Abrams at the front and center of, her experience and her role. So it's not even about reaching out to the other side. Like we're not cohesive. We're not united.
Right.
And then there's a false union among the Republicans in the Trump administration. No one can convince me. I grew up in the Bible Belt. No one can convince me it's as unified and black and white as they're trying to make it look. There's real depth, there's real questions, there's real soul searching going on there as much as it's going on our side.
Sure.
And that's the people I want to reach.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think what you're saying about how there needs to be a reconciliation. I always look at it as it's like a feud. It's like the Hatfields and McCoys, and we're uniquely positioned to deal with that because we deal with feuds, with tribal feuds and family feuds all the time in the areas that we work in the Middle East and Central Asia. So it's very familiar, I think, to me.
Yeah.
I know to you, and it is a feud, and I think that they need to just, particularly the media and how and both parties need to kind of start to accept that we've moved beyond political differences and and there was no blue wave. We are at this point where we are about 50-50, where people have a euphoric belief in a person and not even necessarily an idea behind that person because they represent their tribe. And that tribe is really passionate about their existence, and as they should be. And we need to sort of figure out and navigate those waters. As a Hamiltonian Federalist, I'm in between both parties, right? Yeah. And I work with everybody. And it's strange because I'm always the person that gets the pocket calls from everybody on this, that, whatever it is. But then they're saying, John, we don't want you in the administration. In some cases, you're not ethnic enough. You're not this enough. You're not that enough. You're not a party. You're not part of our tribe. So we're not willing to take your have you sign on. But I think that
yet you represent, I think, the majority of America right now, because I think most Americans want to find that middle ground. And now I guess I know why they do call you the unicorn, because it's a really hard space. And I think that as a peace builder, I remember a lot of people asking me, and even on in the media, which I was surprised that they would ask this question, is like, well, the time has come. You must choose between your identities. Are you American? Are you Arab? Are you American? You're Muslim? And there was like these consistent questions of trying to force me to choose. And it's like, no, the time is more important than ever to merge. Like, this is the moment where I refuse to choose. And that's when as the bridge builders, we step up strongly. I think what worries me is it's not just about attacking the other side. As you know, I've studied trauma and resilience in the neuroscience of the brain. And, what we've done on a national level is we have jacked up our nervous systems to such an extreme, to this constant watching of news, that it's actually become the familiar. And so we've actually forgotten how to be in a place of love. We've forgotten what brings us joy. We're just almost like that familiar sense of shock, that familiar sense of needing to take action, of reaction, is where we're at. And it's not where peace is built. It's not where we can hear one another. It's not where bridges are built. That's where you're in that fight or flight mode. And we have to just bring down the nervous system once more. And I don't know how Biden's going to do that. It can't be through false appeasement. This is where I do get a little bit worried that there is a little bit of like, let's all hold hands so no one can hold a gun, and he'll lose his base if he doesn't take more strong action.
No, I agree. I think there's your assessment about trauma and is spot on. We're all used to reacting to things. I'm used to being the person that kind of pushes things down because I got to deal with all the crazy and do it behind closed doors. And
you do it well. I've seen this, so you do it really well.
Now that Muslims for Muslims is kicking, and we've got the Crossing Faith podcast and all this other stuff. We're doing it more in the open. But the idea of the secondary trauma, where we are now accepting the like what's going on with the president. A lot of the Trumpers, the Trumpers, they're accepting his trauma as if it's theirs, instead of looking at it as, okay, this vote happened. He won the election back in the day in 2016, 2020 is the Dems. Okay, everything's fine. They're spearheading this agenda. I mean, I've seen a lot of some of my old service buddies that were veterans for Trump and all kinds of other stuff have they've created these own charts that show that Trump wins 300 15 electoral votes. Like they have a chart, the same chart of the country, but it's changed, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I go, what is this? They go, well, I go, what is this, some kind of theoretical thing? They go, no, this is the win. And they're doing it to show loyalty. They're doing it to show what they're saying. This is what's actually happened, that these elections will be overturned in different states. And they're doing it not because they're subversive, not because they're trying to be malicious. They're doing it because it's a paternal relationship.
Yeah.
And I mean paternal in the sense that they really believe he's like a father figure, like a czar,
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
in Tsarist Russia, and they want to comfort him, and
Yeah.
and they're sending it to me, going, send this to Trump, and I was like, I'm not sending nonsense, and they're going, no, please, because I'm worried about him,
Yeah.
and I'm like scratching my head, going, well, it's the president, he doesn't really know you. You know, like I'm trying to go through this whole thing,
Yeah.
but they really feel it's like, oh, you know, he's their father, he's our benefactor, and he's sad.
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's that. I mean, if this is a literal conversation, so and so I'm going, oh, okay, and I think that so this is to your point, that about the psychology behind it is much more, has much more breadth and scope to it than I think on the cursory sort of surface evaluation. And it is tribal, it is familial. We've been dealing with so much trauma. People feel like they're hurting their family
Yeah. Yeah.
if they hurt the party or go against it.
Well, people are hurting their families, right? I mean, like, think about the family feuds. Think about how many people would joke every year when Thanksgiving would roll around and be like, we can't, have this conversation. We can't have that.
Yeah.
I know with my friends, I had to set some ground rules because I didn't want to enter conversations that would end up being triggering. And, even though people
I'm
would
giggling
argue,
because I'm just a big trigger with you. So
yeah, well, but you do it on purpose. Like, I'm totally convinced you do it on purpose. You have that little scan and can see the hot flash and it's like boop, boop, boop
I
right
just
there.
wish the
But
Palestinians would just give back the pyramids, and then everything would be okay. I just okay.
I'll leave that there. But yeah, and I remember one friend pushing back on me and being like, this is what you do for a living. Like, if I can't have a conversation with you. And I was like, no, like, this is like, self-care comes first. And if I can't come home to a place where I feel safe and like go out with friends where I feel safe, then that place isn't just like, where are you going to get it? So I think that there is definitely a lot of harm and hurt that happened in between families and friends that also needs mending. I mean, the Facebook feuds alone could be an entitled book. Like, the amount of stuff that went down there was really off the charts.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think just look at us. We have a lot of coffee. We hang out and do all kinds of stuff. And my hands are completely up on Israel Palestine, right? So like, and we've had our run-ins. And it's not because I'm not interested in the issue, and it's not because I'm not about justice. It's just that it's a family issue with you. It's not close to home. It is home.
Absolutely.
And so there's. And I have very similar issues when it comes to Afghanistan and how I feel about certain things. So I think that
one thing that I do want to highlight is, like, for me, social justice is a personal issue, right?
Yeah.
You can't talk about it in terms of like, oh, this is a political or this is policy. All of it is a social issue. So, Palestine opened, because I'm Palestinian, it opened my eyes to injustices. But then by default, it made Black Lives Matter a personal issue. It made Kashmir a personal issue. It made Kurdistan a personal issue. I was in Sudan when it was one country, and the conversations around the division became a personal issue. So, I think that's the beauty of being touched by injustices, is your eyes are awakened. And I think I always joke, as a Muslim woman, like, a lot of my friends fall in the LGBTQ camp, and it's because we both know that the mainstream lie to us constantly. And so although our issues can't be further, apart in terms of political or in terms of sexual liberties, but at the end of the day, I think if you've tasted injustice in any form, that veil drops and you can see through so much that you haven't seen before. So honestly, all these injustices are personal to me, and I refuse to pretend that they're not.
No, we espouse the same view, and we feel that, we have the same manner of looking at things. I just had this conversation about the commissioners at the United States Commission for International Religious Freedom, and I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for saying this, but there's an appointee there's a commissioner who is a Uyghur, And I go, out of all the commissioners, this is the only one that actually has been through something.
Huh.
The rest of them are all talking about it, and so they might have personal trauma, this and that, but when it comes to religious persecution and actually being in country and having, this is the guy. Are you gonna say? I hope you're not gonna counterbalance me. Well, if you are, it's okay. But the point is that it's interesting because it's different than taking a trip over to the Middle East and then crapping on a few books and having the idea of something, right? And that's very, very different than being, I'm a 4th generation refugee. I don't claim to be a refugee at all, but I do know that the effect of what happens to its family is this right here. Okay.
Yeah.
And I know that, but living and working in countries and spending time doing that, as opposed to just flying in, makes a big difference. And that allows you to own the issues and be able to translate them into something that's useful when it comes to policy records or programming or whatever the hell it is that we do. So, I think that it's strange because the identity that you have, the identity that I have, the identity that a lot of Americans have, and this doesn't just speak to Muslims, different faith groups, different ethnic groups, different cultures, Americans, whatever we want to say. We all have been dealing with a long period of trauma, and it didn't start with Trump.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
It didn't start with Trump. I mean, arguably, maybe it started in the 90s. Maybe you could say that when it comes to politics turning into a feud.
Probably with Reagan, but yeah.
Well, I always say it was Newt Gingrich, who was probably one of the most intelligent.
Who really brought it up, yeah.
Well, I mean, he was probably one of the top 3 constitutional scholars in Washington at the time when he was Speaker of the House, and he turned the whole thing into vendetta politics. He's the guy who made it where if you were a Republican talking to a Dem, you would be you wouldn't be invited to the meeting, or you'd be ignored in the meeting, and he started that switch. Vendetta politics, and it's such a shame because he's a genius when it comes to constitutional politics. I would love to see him get in the fray about constitutional politics and talk about stuff from a perspective of really his skill set, but he's really all about pushing the vendetta forward and creating this idea of the feud, which he succeeded and was probably the forefather of it. I don't know if Reagan so much was that, but Reagan was Reagan.
No, I think that's fair in terms of the intellectual. I think in terms of policies, that's what began to really impact the divide. That's what really began to impact, our public education system. I tend to be very sympathetic when we're, yelling how ignorant America is, when we've actually gutted our public education system and surprised 30 years later to see what we have. But, I think you mentioned about the different identities we have and what we're bringing to the table. And, when we actually first met, if you remember that on the panel, I talked about the Islamic concept of amana. And, I am someone who takes it really seriously. Like, I do feel that whatever opportunity is given to us in this lifetime as a person of faith, we're held accountable for what we do with it. Yeah. And when I look at my skill set, I'm a trained economist and I'm a trained negotiator, and I've helped other countries in transitions. And as you know, I've been based overseas over the last 2 years. And because of Corona, I kind of got stuck in the US, but now I've really come to believe that I have a responsibility as a citizen to share that skill set, to help in whatever is coming, what next. And I've decided, not to do it through the government lens, but do it through the civic lens, because that's where I'm the strongest and that's where my background is the strongest. So I do hope everyone kind of looks inward. It's great to tell other people what to do. And I think I'll speak as a Democrat, we've been pretty horrible. We've been pretty nasty, just assuming everyone's a racist, very condescending, and, our heads tilt when we're trying to explain to people why they're wrong. And, that can be very triggering for a lot of people. And I think it's time everybody just look inward, think about their specific skill set and how they're going to use it to really see and create the next world, the next transition, the next country that they want to live in. Because whether you know it or not, the social contract is being renegotiated globally.
Yeah.
There are too many issues for us to be holding on to the old contract. And, I this is where my work in Europe has been really energizing, is that they're leaps and bounds ahead. When I'm talking about trauma and the social contract, those are very normal conversations in Germany, in Paris, and, other contexts. And I see the rolling of the eyes. I
Well, they're
see
not
it.
working.
I
I mean,
see
let's just
it.
be honest. They're all eating cheese and bread, and they got a lot of time off. So I mean, let's just be, I mean, they're on vacation 8 weeks a year. So they're not hustling like we are. But
I mean, they got the
I'll
best
give it to you. They're
chocolate,
much
so
more
they're doing
sensitive.
something right,
Yeah, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, there's too much more sensitive. But that's my pro-America stance. Okay, so that's
Yeah,
fine.
I mean, fair enough, fair enough. I'd like to see a lot more. I mean, keeping in mind they are the, father and mother of colonialism. So I'm not promoting Europe
Right.
completely, but at the same time, I'm saying the transitions, the way they've learned from history. I'd like to see everyone, including America, deal better with their colonial past. But
Sure.
there is trends that we're still lagging behind on the international scene. And I'm proud of my adopted homeland. I really, really, really believe in the American experiment. I've lived in countries all over the world. And I always say, as a Muslim, as an Arab, and more importantly, as a woman, and probably as a Muslim woman, I wouldn't want to be in any other country than this country, because we still have a basic respect for the rule of law. I hope that this is what's really being tested in this transition. I hope that continues to stand. But as long as we have that respect for rule of law, despite its inequities, despite its problems, we have a system to fight within.
I appreciate the comments. I know that we're running out of time, so I wanted to, you have the last word. So, and I appreciate you giving your insights on this moment. So this is Crossing Faiths, our production of Roll Top Productions and Muslims for Muslims International. Our special guest on a post-election eval was Manal Omar with Across Red Lines. If you will, in the show notes, we'll put some sexy links. One is to Let Love In, the campaign that is Across Red Lines is promoting right now, and it's the idea behind it is to create a video of how you let love in, and maybe you could just give us one last one-liner. What's the elevator pitch on Let Love In, so people can get motivated and participate.
I think it's just, remember your place of joy. And whenever you're in that place where you're feeling tension and frustration, go back to that place of joy. And I think that that's what we're hoping to share and inspire one another about by sharing our own personal places of joy.
I asked Mom yesterday, can we do a Let Love In video? And she goes, well, my love's conditional. So I said, she just started right up to it. So he's like, I don't know, which day are we going to do it on? So we can leave on that note. But thank you so much, Manal, for taking your time. And I
Thank you
appreciate
for
your
having me.
insights. And I will, and then we'll look forward to doing this again soon.
Great. Thank you for having me. It's always great.
Thank you so long.